Aloha, my name's Anna Covert, and I'm coming to you from my battleship here on the beautiful island of Oahu. This week on the Covert Code, the topic is the power of storytelling and advocacy, and I'm pleased to introduce Laura Morton, award-winning filmmaker, best-selling author of over 60 titles, and mental health care advocate. With decades of experience in entertainment and publishing, Laura is here to share insights on crafting impactful narratives, creating content that really moves the needle, and using storytelling to create meaningful change. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's nice to meet you.
You too. So to get the party started or kick things off, could you share a little bit about your professional journey and vision behind Laura Morton Management?
Sure. I Well, we're going back a long way. Um, so I didn't really start off writing. I actually was in production, um, and I pioneered the celebrity exercise video market. So when we actually still use VHS tapes, and I worked with people like Richard Simmons and lots of other people who you may or may not know. But storytelling comes in a lot of different forms, right? And I got into my writing career because I did an exercise video with a woman by the name of Joan London. Joan was the host of Good Morning America for 20 years. And when I did her exercise video, which was called Workout America, a little play on Good Morning.
I remember that one.
Yeah, so I produced that, and Joan and I hit it off like long lost best friends, and in fact, we are still best friends. And we went out to dinner, and I said to her, the exercise video is really great, but I feel like you're not telling your whole story. At the time, she was 40. She had just gone through a very high profile divorce. She had lost 50 pounds. She was single. She had three young girls. I said, I think women would really relate to you. I think you should write a book. And she said, great. Why don't you write it with me? And that is how I got started in my journey as an author, as a co author. And it's kind of a funny story because when we came up with this idea, we were at dinner and we just started jotting down like all the things we thought the book could be. And we came up with this idea to make it half cookbook and half memoir. And because, that's what I think her fan base really wanted to know. She looked amazing and she had dropped all of this weight. And the next day we went to go see her agent at the time it was the William Morris agency. Now is, William Morris Endeavor. And we went to go see her agent who thought that it was the worst idea he had ever heard.
Wow.
Yeah. And I said to him, I said, like, the worst ever? Like, of all ideas you've ever heard, this is the worst idea you've ever heard? He said, yeah. I don't think anybody will buy into it. I said, why is that? He said, because uh, Joan doesn't cook. And I said, but it doesn't matter if Joan cooks. She's on a show with 20 million viewers a week in the kitchen, cooking with Wolfgang Puck and Julia Child and all of these other like amazing chefs. So like she's just every other mom that's just trying to keep her family fed and putting food on the table. Said I don't think you're right. And so I went around and started knocking on doors to publishers and said, I've got this book. It's part cookbook and part memoir, and it's got Joan London. And we think this could be really a big thing. And I got an offer. I actually got a couple of offers, but I got a pretty substantial offer from a publishing house. And when we got the offer, we took it to Joan's attorney, who had just done a deal for another client of his who was Diana Ross, and said, maybe we should talk to her agent. And so we met this agent by the name of Al Lohman, and Al was legendary. There's Swifty Lazar on the West Coast and Al Lohman on the East Coast. They were just legendary in publishing. And so we met Al, and Al loved it. He thought he could do great. And in fact, he ended up doubling the money that I got.
Wow.
Yeah. So, Joan and I wrote that book. It's, I think the cover's over here. It's called Healthy Cooking. And it was the beginning of a very long and lucrative franchise for her. And that book was on the New York Times bestseller list for 21 weeks. So, yeah, but her agent was very happy to take his cut. the one that said it was the worst idea ever.
I'm sure you
Yeah.
are.
So I guess it wasn't such a bad idea after all. But that's really what launched me as a writer in this business.
Wow, that's really a great story. So tell me, I know especially right now with what's going on in the world, mental health is just such a really important topic. How did you get involved in mental health awareness? And tell me a little bit about your movie Anxious Nation.
Sure. Thank you for asking. I'm the parent of a teenage girl. And any parent in the world today, and most of us who don't have kids are struggling with anxiety. And as a parent, I really didn't understand what my child was going through. And she had been exhibiting signs of anxiety since she was like 3 years old.
Wow.
And so this, goes way back before COVID. And so I had the idea, listen, I thought what was happening in my house was only happening in our house. And I really thought that it was failing as a mom. I just thought like I'm screwing this up in the worst way. And it just doesn't feel like I'm making good choices or doing the right things, even though I was doing what I felt was the right thing, getting her help and taking her to therapy and taking her to every doctor because when you're so young and exhibiting those signs, very often pediatricians will not look at above the neck. They look at below the neck. It's a food allergy. It's, there's something else going on, but they don't look at mental health, especially with our young kids. And, they kind of push it off and say, oh, they'll outgrow it. Oh, this is just what being a toddler is. And I was getting this information from doctors who I thought were world class. And I thought if I was getting this kind of information and my family was struggling, I just could not imagine how other families were getting through this. Right. So in 2018, I put a one line post on Facebook, kids and anxiety, who's dealing with it. And I was stunned because I told you, I really thought that what was happening with my daughter was just happening in our home because nobody was talking about it. There was so much stigma around mental health. There still is. And I suppose if there was a silver lining to COVID at all, it's that we're talking about it, that you're asking this kind of question. And so, I was really shocked at the response that I got because it came from people that I knew. And the responses that I got came from people that I socialized with, and we had never talked about what was going on in our families. And it was almost as if that one line just opened a floodgate and allowed people to feel seen and heard.
Wow.
And as a storyteller, I knew that this was, to me, it was bigger than a book. There's something about writing about anxiety, and then there's something about hearing about it from those who really are struggling. And I had never made a film before. Certainly, I had had my experiences as a producer, but I had never made a film before. And everything in my gut just told me that's what this is. And I set out to make Anxious Nation initially in 2018 to answer really one question. Are we more anxious or are we just more aware of it? And in 2018, that was, I think, a really relevant question. In 2025, I think that the answer is obvious. We are more anxious and we're more aware of it. And, it was really interesting because we ended up filming throughout COVID, and it allowed us to really see anxiety in real time and have our kids and their families share their stories so openly and so courageously and raw and authentic. And it was something that, as a parent who has a child who struggles with anxiety, was so eye opening for me. And the idea that I was able to interview the best experts in the field. And, on one hand, it was purely selfish. And on the other hand, it was completely selfless because I knew everybody needed this information. And so it was extraordinary. And the reason why I chose to put my family in the film, because I really struggled with the idea of being the gratuitous filmmaker who was also in the film, is because I didn't think it was right to ask other families to do what we weren't willing to do. So we also had to be raw and real and authentic and open and, showing our flaws and our struggle and uh, things that I thought I was doing as a loving and caring parent that that really were actually adding to my daughter's anxiety without me knowing it.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, in every family that participates in this film, really stepped out into a world of trust in allowing us to share their stories. And I think that's why the film is done so well. And I think that's why people, when they watch the film, they really do feel validated and they feel seen and heard. Not only do they understand that anxiety is not a one size fits all, right? It's re- it shows up different for everybody, which is why there's not like one answer to manage anxiety.
Right. Or medication, right? Like,
Well, it's medication's right for some people and it's not right for some people.
yep.
And so it just depends. And we talk very openly about medication in the film. We don't take a stance one way or the other. If that's what is your path and that is what works for you, that is what you should do.
Yeah.
And there are some families that have done very well on medication. There are some kids who have been overly medicated, wrongly medicated. Um, it is, uh, it's not a perfect science. And, it is something that I think we hear more and more um, about kids who are just so quickly put on medication when in fact they shouldn't be. And kids who are never put on medication when they should be.
Right.
So I think it really, I think the message and the story revolves around being your best advocate, right? Or being your child's best advocate. And so this thrust me into the world of becoming a mental health advocate with my daughter, who is now 16, and my daughter who speaks to her generation about this and really is, was the inspiration behind the film and has become a peer-to-peer voice. And I really appreciate that she has embraced that role because of doing this film. She's done work with Lady Gaga's foundation, the Born This Way Foundation, and she's done work at UCLA and all over the country. And uh, Morgan Stanley recently brought her in to be on a panel, and it's amazing what these young voices. Well, it is exciting, but it's these are the voices we need to hear from.
Yes.
And, it is so fascinating because we're not listening to the kids. Then we're making a mistake of colossal proportion because they actually understand how they feel. We process it through our adult eyes. And so we have to allow our kids to share how they feel and then we have to honor it.
Yes.
And, so I learned a lot as a parent from making this film. And, for anybody listening, you can watch the film on Amazon Prime or on iTunes, Apple TV. And you can also host a community screening. You can reach out to us at anxiousnation.com and we'll set up a screening with you. And we think that it's a really important community building subject because so many families are struggling and they think they're alone and they think it's just happening to them. And when you come together in community and you talk about these things, you also build a network of support and hope. And that's what it's all about.
I think you're right. And I think that also, a lot of times people might think, oh, well, I'm not as serious as my struggles aren't as serious as that other person's struggles. Right. But everyone's struggling. Doesn't matter what level or, if you're feeling this way, then it's valid and there's a community for you.
Well, and I think it's a very common belief that, like you said, like our struggles are not as bad as somebody else's. Well, they are for you. And, I don't know why we have to compare. There are some things in this world you don't need to be competitive in, right? And, what is impacting your family and what is impacting your children or impacting you individually? Because we are living in very anxious times right now. And, there's a lot going on in the world, and there's always been a lot going on in the world, but there happens to be a lot going on in the world right now. And I don't know anybody who isn't on some level trying to figure out what to do with that energy. And that's what anxiety is, right? It's an energy. And
Right.
the important thing to know about anxiety is that it's not curable, right? It's not a disease. And it's actually a natural response. It's the fight or flight response that is in your DNA. And so what you can learn to do is manage it. You can learn to recognize those feelings when they pop up. But anybody who tells you they've cured their anxiety doesn't really understand anxiety. You want to be anxious in the right circumstances.
Right, there's 3 different types, right? There's the fear where you have to run, there's emotional anxiety, and then there's environmental. So there's just so many types that can all
Well,
be.
there are there and those are sort of, broad spectrums that have a lot of things that fall under those, right?
Right.
And but the fact of the matter is, it's in your DNA, and that's why people don't understand that. Like when you go to see a scary movie, that's what that's playing on, right? That feeling is designed to make you anxious. It's designed to make you uncomfortable. And, it's designed to poke at the fight or flight or freeze response. And that's what makes scary movies so popular, oddly,
Yeah, I'm
right?
not a fan, I don't want any of that in my brain. Yeah.
I'd never been a fan, but that,
No.
it's really interesting that so many people are, and in particular, anxious people, because it's a familiar feeling, right?
Interesting. Very
So
addictive, very in a sense has an addictive feeling too, that you don't want to be, but then you're getting different types of chemicals in your body that you then can become addicted to.
yeah, it's interesting. We had a doctor, one of the doctors that I interviewed, said, defining anxiety is a lot like defining love. It's just not a one, you know, definition, uh, you know, a condition, right? And so what's odd about anxiety and interesting about anxiety is it really is a shapeshifter. As in love, when you think about it,
Mhm.
right? When you fall madly in love with somebody, you're in that honeymoon phase, and then it just kind of shifts into something else. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, right? Um, but with anxiety, I can tell you with my daughter, I mean, what made her anxious as a child is not what makes her anxious today. There are some carry throughs. But for a long time, I just never knew what was waiting for me around the corner with her because, it was like any kid is like a kid who one day will eat like, their vegetables, and the next day they're like, "I don't like vegetables." You're like, "But you ate them yesterday." Yeah, so they're like, "Yeah, but I don't like them anymore." So now we'll move into like chicken. Oh, great. Well, I don't like chicken anymore either. And you're like, "Well, I don't really know what to do because you ate chicken yesterday." Like,
Right.
and so it's such a simple way of looking at it, but that really is, and especially if you're dealing with a child with anxiety, that is how that shows up, and it continuously changes. So,
So you did this, you shot it during COVID, and it sounds like there's still additional content being created. Will there be a second movie coming out? Do you think it's changed post COVID or even post election from your research?
so first and foremost, no, there will not be a follow up to Anxious Nation. Not that I wouldn't want to see where these kids are at and how they're doing, and I can tell you that remarkably, all of our kids are doing really well. And you had several kids in our film who were not doing well at the time. And so, the do I think it's worse post election? I mean, depends where you are and the scale of politics, right? Some people are really happy about it, and some people are really not. And I do think that our anxiety is ratcheted up. I don't think it's getting better. I think it's getting worse, and we're seeing that with absenteeism at school and absenteeism at work. And we're seeing how nobody, post COVID, getting people back into the office has been really, really difficult. And we've learned, and what I fear is that people like to point to social media and our phones and our devices as being the core issue. And I beg to differ on that, right? I really feel like loneliness, isolation, disconnection are the core issues. And I think that the phone and our devices and social media just feeds on that crisis.
Right.
And, Vivek Murthy, talked a lot about the crisis of loneliness and isolation in this country, and we've done nothing to you know, address that. And taking phones out of the classroom is not going to solve this problem. And I think you've got a generation coming up that if we don't give them a phone until they're 16, that'll be very different than the generation like my daughter who grew up with it you know? And so the genie's out of the bottle. So what do? We have to teach them resilience. We have to give them the tools. We have to give them the understanding that when these feelings bubble up, how do you deal with them? How do you cope? And what we've learned is that, there are, lots of kids who never are really given those tools. They don't have resilience. And what we see is when they go off to college is that they're ill equipped, right? And so they fall apart and it happens really fast. And, but it didn't just happen. It's how we sent them off into the world. So I think when you watch a film like Anxious Nation, what it does is it shows you that parent journey and it shows you that none of us are perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect parent any more than there is a perfect child. And while you may believe that your child is perfect, they are
But
not.
mine's perfect. I'm just kidding.
Right, right. But you're right. Of course, yours is perfect. They're not because you don't want perfection, right? Where do we learn our greatest lessons? We learn our greatest lessons from failure.
Yep.
And so, perfection is a really hard bar to live up to. And that is, in fact, the danger of social media because it projects images of perfection that are impossible to achieve. And that really is a big piece of what is causing so many issues in and around social media. So, I think what's really important is to understand, um, what I find as being very tolerable and manageable, my daughter might not. And I have to understand that she is not me and I am not her. And when I learned, one of my greatest lessons from making the film was that I had to allow my daughter to be who she is and not who I want her to be.
Yep.
I can guide her, I can try to direct her, but ultimately she has to be who she is. My daughter has decided she doesn't want to go to college. All her friends are going to go to college. My daughter wants to take a different path. If I were a different parent or if I hadn't made this film, I probably would be forcing the issue for my daughter to go to college. When in fact, I don't think it's actually essential today. And I don't think that is the only path that a student should take in entering the world. It depends on what they want to do. And what I've said, numerous times, and, is that I don't need a $90,000 a year bar bill, right, to send my kid off to college to just go have fun. And I said, so I want to nurture her interests and her strengths and her passion and her commitment. And that is different than mine. And so it's a lot to parent a child in the world today. It's very different than how I grew up and I'm sure how you grew up.
Indeed. Yeah. I mean, I have a daughter, she's 10 and a half, and, just kind of experiencing some of, I think one of my fears, being in marketing and digital for social is that it's adding on to a condition. And what I mean by that is, the more you look for certain content, the more you see of it, right? Even the listening of the AI to you and, you know, basically, kind of manifesting into, always looking for help, and now all I'm seeing is help, and is there a way to break it and say, well, you know what, this person here does look like they're having anxiety, or maybe they're seeing too much of the same content. Let's show them puppies, or let's show them rainbows, or and that's not what it's designed to do. Right?
Well, and showing them puppies and rainbows is not giving them the tools that they
Yeah.
need, right? So, I many years ago I started collecting people's definition of joy, right? And what is your definition of joy? First thing that comes to your mind.
Love. Maybe
Being in love or giving love,
love, like love for life is joy. When you like love yourself and love life, then you live in joy.
right? It's interesting because what I learned about joy, and that's a wonderful definition. What I've learned about joy is it can only be felt in the moment and it cannot be recreated. And so I was fascinated because one of the things they talk about is putting people in a room full of puppies, right? And then that's a moment of joy. But when you think back to being with the puppies, you never feel the same.
True. Yep.
And it's that release of oxytocin, which is a really important thing to know, right? Because when you can release oxytocin, which is also the same chemical that's released when you're in love.
Yep.
So your definition of joy is very similar to the feeling of joy because it involves the release of that chemical in the body. And so it's a fascinating question to ask people, and I very rarely get the same answer twice. Occasionally, I hear from guys something and then we move on. You know, but, um, but it's fascinating when you think about it. But I will tell you, as the parent of a 10-year-old, and I'm not saying this because I'm the filmmaker, I'm saying this because you're a parent. You should watch our film
Yes.
because it is a good time as your daughter is going into these years, which are very challenging, right? And she's moving into soon middle school, and that's where girls just start to not be so nice and and their bodies start to change and their hormones start to go a little, you know, wacky and um but girls especially, young girls are so susceptible today. And as a parent, the more you know, the better you can do. So I always tell parents, especially parents of younger kids, that you know what's right for your child, but listen because your child also knows what's right for them. And so I would encourage you to watch our film, and I will, I would love to hear your thoughts on it when you do.
I absolutely will. Yeah, one of the things I'm interested to know if you're a meditator.
Good question. I've tried numerous times. I do when I know it's the right thing to do, I do, and I need an app to do it. I cannot meditate on my own. Um, and I have found that when I do meditate twice a day, in the morning and at night, I find I'm so much more productive. It is really when you do the kind of work that I do. What a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that. Um, my head is full of other people's content, right? And so, which means I carry other people's trauma and other people's sadness. And, as an empath by nature, so it is a lot sometimes when then you layer that on with whatever my own life is, and then my child's life, and then, everything else. So I have found that meditation is a very good practice, particularly when I'm working on something that is excruciatingly painful.
Yeah. I've been doing a lot of meditating recently. I just got turned on to Dr. Joe Dispenza. I don't know if you follow him or
I
not.
do. I just used a quote of his in one of my books.
Big fan, and I've been, doing different meditations in the morning, and I've just found so much peace and tranquility that, that I'm now having my daughter. We're doing 10 minutes of meditation together. She's not happy about it, but I know that one day
It's good for
she'll
her.
thank me that, she can have that time to just be, think of yourself and go inside and what comes up, and I think that journaling and things like that are also really great tools for children.
Have you done any of his courses, or are you just doing the
Was
outreach?
watching it. I found him from Lewis Howes. I love the School of Greatness, and I'm a big manifester and just, all of the Miracle Morning and all those kinds of practices, and so I found I've been, like, watching a lot of his content, but haven't done any specific classes, but really enjoy his meditations, and, now I find, like, I get up at 4 o'clock every morning, but now I may not have enough time to do the full 30-minute meditation if I don't get up at, like, maybe 3:30, so I'm trying to play that out in my mind if I can commit
Yeah.
to that, yeah.
If you get a chance to go in person to one of his week, events, do it.
Have you been?
Everybody I know who's done it, it has impacted and changed their lives in such significant ways.
Yeah,
So,
formative. I've
yeah.
been watching all of his stuff and just, like, it's true. I mean, the limits that we think, and I think that's another part of, for me, of the anxiety that I would feel when I would feel it would be like the time. It was all time related that I was, didn't have enough time for things and, with clients and really like, being able to think about or manifest about that and that, I'm limitless and there's unlimited time if you make more time for yourself first.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but time is such a valuable commodity. So you have to allocate it very wisely. And I think that 30 minutes is a wise allocation of time. You're inspiring me.
Well, thank you. And a little quick story. So I also, my experience with mental health is I've always been very lucky because I've always been a very happy and fortunate person. Myself not really been had a lot of mental health issues, but my father, he did struggle with mental health and when I grew up, there really wasn't that many medications available, at the time. And I remember me and my mom, he would take medication, then it wouldn't make him feel good or whatnot, and he would stop taking it. Me and my mom would always like, kind of joke about it, but it wasn't very funny that we always should crush up his happy pills and put it in his food and things like that. And I went to prep school in California and then college in Boston, and I never planned on moving to Hawaii. I'm from Aspen, Colorado originally. My parents were out here. My dad retired early and they were snowbirding. That's what we call it in Hawaii when you come for the winter. And I graduated college early and was going to go back to Boston to finish this master's program, but came out to Hawaii for 6 months. And during that time, me and my father really never had like a very, he was always a great father, but we never had a close relationship with him because of some of these, he was very, would go very internal and, was always worried about getting cancer. And he ended up getting cancer, but that's neither here nor there. But when I finally came back out, he was medicated with this antipsychotic that they didn't have when I was a child. And it was such a game changer, that in our life. And I was just so grateful that got to, even though it wasn't that long before he passed away, being able to, spend time with him as an adult was really, meaningful. So I appreciate the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you for sharing that with me. Yeah, it's life is a journey, and when we're done with the interview, we can talk about Aspen. But yeah, I know life is a journey. Thank you for sharing that with me. It is not an easy journey, especially when you love somebody who is struggling, who is struggling with mental illness,
Yeah.
and that's the dilemma when you talk about mental health, as it means something different to everyone, right? And to somebody, it could be schizophrenia, right? When you're talking, you're bipolar, and to somebody else, it could be I'm having a bad day. I mean, I need a mental health day. And, to somebody else, it's like, oh, I'm going to take care of my mental health and go to the spa. I mean, it is just however we view it. And, but when you love somebody who is struggling and you yourself are not, there is a disconnect on what they're really going through, right? Why is this so hard for them?
Right.
Why, like, why can't they just get it together? I mean, that's like telling an alcoholic to just stop drinking,
Right.
you know, or a drug addict, or and so it really requires proper treatment. And and there's so many things now that breakthrough treatments, plant medicine, psychedelics, under the proper care, have proven to be extremely positive. And I wrote about that. I did a book with Bob Parsons, who is the founder of GoDaddy and PXG Golf. And Bob talks very openly about his work with psychedelics
Yep.
to alleviate his PTSD from Vietnam, which he has had for 50 years.
Oh yeah.
And so, but did not know that that's what he had, and was never treated properly for it. And 3 sessions, you know, were game changing for him. And so I think it's really amazing that we are moving, I think, toward acceptance of some of these treatments. Uh, the as we talked about early on with medication, and I think when you're properly medicated, and medication is a big category these days, right? Um, then I'm all for it. But I feel like we live in a society that is designed to keep us sick.
Yep. That's right.
So giving you a pill that, when it's not the right path for you. Okay. Uh, I mean, we have kids in the film that talk about being on Klonopin,
Oh
you know,
wow.
well, at a very young age,
Yeah.
and with
Tranquilizer.
suicidal ideation, very
Yeah.
powerful, with suicidal ideation, and then put on Klonopin, which only heightened their suicidal ideation, right? Which, led to an attempted suicide 3 different times from one of our kids. And, thankfully, she was not successful in taking her own life, and, and was able to talk about it. But that was a case of somebody, she was on 14 different medications at one time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
And so there is something that's very broken in the system. And our mental health system in general in this country has never been set up right. So it's hard to say that it's broken, right? Because it doesn't work. And we live in a world where we've criminalized mental health instead of taking what resources we have to help those who are in pain. And, we always tell the story. I can't remember if this is in the movie, but I think it is in the movie. But there's a story, that if you had a heart attack, you grab your chest and you fall down and, on a sidewalk on a busy city street, they're calling an ambulance. But if you have a psychotic break on a busy city street, they're calling the police
Right.
and they're taking you to jail.
Straight jackets and
Right. It is, the system is not well equipped. And the demand, to your earlier question, the demand is getting greater, not less. And people are struggling more. And it's debilitating for a lot of people. So, I hope that it's helpful to know that we see you and we hear you, and you are not alone in this struggle, and there are resources to reach out to, and 988 is a good place to start. If you're struggling right now when you're listening to this, dial 988.
thing. Yeah, then and what are your thoughts on, now I think we were talking about the idea of storytelling and really authenticity and how important it is and how it can be liberating. And but now with some of these changes in our world around us, with transgenders and women's rights and things, being authentic can become something that is even more scary because now you can actually be targeted from being authentic and from telling your story. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's an interesting question. I think that it's a very sad commentary on where we are. And I think you should always be able, we have something in this country called freedom of speech. And it's not freedom of speech that I want to hear, it's freedom of speech. And you may not agree with everything that people say, but people have the right to say it. And I feel very protective over those who are currently um, really being singled out and targeted. And whether you're transgender or Muslim or Jewish, or I mean, I can give you a long list, right? Um, I think that it is uh, a heartbreak. Uh, I think that for me, I would say, don't stop telling your story. Live firm and strong in your stance. And I think that I mean, obviously, I would never want anyone to put themselves in harm's way by doing so. But I think if we are not going to have the difficult conversations, right? And we're only choosing to have the easy conversations, we will never affect change. And we have to have some difficult conversations around this subject.
Yes. We do. So that's going to bring me to my last question, which I think we all have to always talk about now today is AI, right? And I know, in mental health in particular, there's some applications of AI being used, and there's some kind of scary outcomes of some of these AI guided, recommendations for care. And do you have any experience with those? And do you have any thoughts?
So when my daughter was at this event in New York, this Morgan Stanley event, it was a gathering of uh, different startups in the mental health field. What I took away from that is that most people really are not, uh, they're not embracing these apps, and they're not embracing, that it's so interesting that, out of convenience, you would think that people really want it. They don't. They want connection. They want contact. They want human contact. And kids in particular. And my daughter was on a panel with another young man who's 22, and he's been very involved in changing the legislature under the Child Protection Safety Act. This 22-year-old, he's had like 3 tech startups. He's very successful. And he said, when I was 16 years old, it's like the last thing I wanted to do was go on my phone, log into an app, and get help. He's like, that just wasn't what I was looking for. And the thing that I really took away from this event, and this was just, towards the end of the year in 2024, so it's pretty current, was that while there are some really interesting things coming down the pike, right? Um, for example, I know of a startup company that is launching a TikTok that only will contain positive messaging.
Good.
right?
Yeah.
And so these are the things that I think, make sense to me. And I do think that online care has potential, but we have a personnel shortage in this country. So who is it that is on the other end giving you that advice and just going down a script and not really listening to you? That worries me,
Yeah.
right? So I really do like the idea, particularly for people who live in rural areas and lower socioeconomic areas, that this does open up the door for some resources. As long as the people that they're coming into contact with and or the program, the ad, because you specifically talk about AI, and there are a lot of non-AI programs, right? But as long as, AI is as good as the content that we feed it.
Yes.
And hopefully it will continue to get better and better and better and better. What it will never do in any field is replace human touch.
True.
It will never replace human emotion. So that connection is really important when it comes to self-care, right? And as a writer and as a storyteller,
Even more isolated to your point about being lonely. I mean, that's
right?
just another way to be even more lonely.
For sure. And as a storyteller and a writer, and everybody's talking about how AI is going to upend the industry. I don't think it will. I really don't. I think some areas of the industry, and I can tell you, I read a press release using ChatGPT in about 30 seconds, right?
Amazing.
I thought, well, that's cool
Yeah.
because, but it wasn't exactly right. And it didn't have all the details. And it's as good as the prompt that you give it. And, so I think there are some things. Look, we've been using AI for years. Every time you go on Open Table, you're using AI, right? Every time you make a reservation on hotels.com, you're using AI. So we've been using AI for years and years and years and years. And it is it's here to stay, right? You go into a Panera and you go up to the kiosk and you're putting your little thing, that's AI. But I still think that human contact, that one-on-one connection will that just is I think it's essential for human survival.
Part of our history of storytelling, right? And how communication was transferred from generation to generation. It's stories and that's I think at
Exactly.
the crux of it. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's stories, to have an effective story, you need to have, listeners. You need somebody that you're talking with and to.
Yep.
And so, it's knowing your audience. And you know, all of these companies that are dipping their toe into the world of mental health and well-being, my hat's off to all of them because everybody's looking to do good. Okay. They really are. And, but what is so hard to understand is we're trying to solve a problem that is not curable, right? It's
Right.
treatable. And so if we look at it and go, okay, great, then I'm going to offer resources no different than our film, no different than Anxious Nation. Let this be a resource. And you want to show this in your classroom at school? Great. Here's a guide to show you how to do that. And, and keep people talking about it and connecting about it because it's really simple. The simplest thing. Do you remember last year when Elmo tweeted? I think it was on X, obviously. It was, I don't know if you call it a tweet on X, but
I think it's a tweet on X because used
yeah,
yeah.
right. But Elmo tweeted, Elmo's just checking in. How are you? That's all he asked. And he started this puppet, by the way, started a global therapy session.
Wow. I didn't even
And
so cool.
because that act of just saying, just checking in, how are you, is really what it's all about. And listening when somebody says, let me tell you how I am. Okay. Or having the courage to not just write back, I'm great. How are you? When you're not great.
Right.
You know, we have to remember how to communicate. And that is all in our storytelling, right? The stories that we tell ourselves and the story that we tell others.
It's yeah, that's good. It's very powerful. Wow, I got chills thinking about it. Well, thank you so much for being a guest today. To learn more about Laura Morton, you can visit her online and follow her on LinkedIn. Make sure to watch Anxious Nation on Amazon Prime and YouTube. You say,
No, it is on Google Play, so you can get it on. Yep, but no, nobody watches it on Google. Sorry, I have to say it, but we are highly watched on Apple TV, iTunes, and Amazon Prime. And it is, it's accessible. If again, if you want to host a screening in your community, just reach out through anxiousnation.com, and you can always reach out to me at lasegabooks.com, LASEGA, and or Laura Morton Management. I'm always eager to hear from people and what they're working on. And we never even got a chance to talk about my imprint today. But I want to give burgeoning storytellers the opportunity to be published, and that's why I launched my imprint.
oh,
So,
tell us a little bit about that before.
yeah, sure. Well, great. How about that?
Yeah. Do that.
As a storyteller and as somebody who understands that journey of being an author for many, many years, right? And having done, so many books and 22 New York Times bestsellers, um, I thought the logical progression was to open up that opportunity for writers who have good stories that just don't have the ability to be in mainstream publishing because traditional publishing today is, to me, it's a antiquated um, business model. But how they determine what makes a book successful or not successful is just a formula that boils down to math. And so, so many people come to me with really, really beautiful manuscripts, and I'm willing to take a risk on them. And I wanted to launch my imprint to not only do that for writers who have these great stories to tell, and there is criteria. I won't just publish anybody, but um, I wanted to honor the writer's journey because so often, especially if you're a collaborator like I am, or a co-author or a ghostwriter, you're so undervalued in that process. And so I really wanted to give those writers an opportunity to be honored and to be revered for the work that they do. Because without those writers, those books would not exist. And so, finding your story and putting it on the page and making it shine is an art form,
Yes.
and it is a critical art form. And, there are some people that do it at the highest level, and there are some people that just do it, right? And so it is just the reason why I wanted to launch Lasega Books was to share good stories, period.
And so are you like a hybrid publisher or
Hybrid publisher. Yep. All of our books are distributed by Simon and Schuster. So they are sold by the Simon and Schuster sales team. They look, feel, and appear to be a Simon and Schuster book, except for they have our imprint on the binding, right? On the cover. And we will help you in every step. It's concierge publishing at the highest level. Uh, and so it's a pay for play. But if you have a big platform and you have an audience, or you want to launch a speaking career, or you have had this manuscript and you don't know what to do with it, it's something that we can take a look at and go, yeah, this is for us, or no, it's not.
you have a certain type of, story that you're like, for example, I obviously I did a Forbes published book because I did a business book, but is there a certain type of niche that you focus on?
So um, the answer is I'm all about nonfiction, right? So you could be a business book and publish with me. You could also be a memoir. I have a book coming out on uh, AI and entrepreneurship. That is, I think, going to be a very big book. They're tying it to the launch of their AI company, which is basically business in a box. So through their AI, you can launch a business in 30 minutes with everything that you need. Yep. And that company is called Autos, and the book is called Me, My Customer, and AI. And that book talks a lot about that customer touch, right? That relationship equity. There's never going to be any replacing that in business. And so for me, I look for good story. So I have a book coming out from one of the top marketers in the country. He owns the largest collection of mailing lists in the world, and you're on probably a dozen of his mailing lists, right? And, I, and I have a book coming out that is uh, a overcoming addiction story. I have a book coming out from a woman who was abused in the Mormon church. So good story. What we don't do, in order to be published on my imprint, you have to have three things. Simple. One, I really have to like you. Two, I have to believe in your message. And three, you have to be putting good in the world. If your book doesn't do those three things, it's a pass.
Yep.
So even if it's an icky story, it's got to be putting good in the world because of it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's enough not good in the world right now. Let's put some good in the world. Let's help people heal because we're hurting.
That's beautiful. Well, being, you know, I've only written one book so far, but I'm actually this weekend I was working on my second book, which is about the solar industry because I'm very passionate about solar. But not seeing that on my roof. I usually have a background with my solar panels, but yeah, it's amazing that you've written so many. Was it over 60 titles?
Yeah, it's probably pushing 70 now.
Wow.
Uh, but I really, and this is not to be humble or smug either. I honestly have stopped counting. The number of books that I've written does not matter to me anymore. It still kind of matters to me when I have a bestseller. And many of my books have been bestsellers, but 22 of them have been New York Times bestsellers. So that's a big deal. And I have a counterpart to myself. He and I have gone up against each other numerous times over the years, and he's got 18, so I'm winning that race. But what it's about really ultimately is good content, and knowing how to get that content out to the reader, and that's part of good storytelling. It isn't enough to write a good book. Remember this: writing a good book is 10% of the work.
Yeah. I mean, I do a lot of reading as well, and I definitely think that the books that really are the most meaningful to me that take with me are the ones that have incorporated a story in them. Like or even business books, like telling your side of why that principle mattered to them. That's
Oh,
what
sure.
you know.
Listen, I did a book with the founder of Remax this year. It came out last spring. Um, it's 140,000 words. It is a tome, right? And but it's 50 years of business wisdom. There isn't a business person on the planet who shouldn't read this book because it's not just that he was the founder of Remax. It was in the top 15 franchise businesses in the world. Think about that. McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, Remax, right? They're all, so he's in the top 15. But he also has the world's largest Arabian horse breeder. He owned a NASCAR race team. He raced in NASCAR when he was in his 50s. He was one of his own drivers. He tried to circumnavigate the globe in a hot air balloon with Richard Branson. Like, there are some amazing lessons that you learn. And all of those lessons, we talked about this earlier in the interview, really come from failure. They don't come from success. Success is the reward. It's not really, the lesson. And, when I get to work with people like that, the amount of content that I get to take away and cherry pick and, use my own life and how I build my own business and how I'm building, my own franchise, not franchise as in a franchise business, but franchise as in, being a writer and film producer and, publisher.
Empire.
Yeah. Well, not yet, but we're getting there. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it's a gift. It's a gift to be able to be in the presence of people who have experienced so much, and you get to learn those life lessons without actually having to go through them. So when you read somebody's story and you read somebody's book, that's what you're taking, right? You're taking their experience and you're adding it into your own. How does this work for me? What can I learn from this? Oh man, I made that mistake. I'll never do that again. Oh, I was about to make this choice. Look what happened to them. This is why we read other people's stories,
Yeah,
to be inspired.
it is.
Yeah.
And that's why I wrote my book I felt there was a critical need in the marketplace with so much fraud happening. I mean, I had clients crying to me on the phone about, half of all their digital advertising is being clicked on by bots.
Right.
Felt like that I had to do something about it,
Yeah.
so I think that
When you get a calling, it's a calling.
it's
You
all.
either answer or you don't,
Yeah.
but you won't ever create change if you don't answer.
Or take those steps to share, right? Even when it's hard or even when it may not be easy, it's always right, what's right for you and for the world.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing this story with me. It's been such a joy to take this time, and I look up to you so much.
Anna, thank you so much. That's so nice of you. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast.
Okay. Well, for all my listeners, please join me next week as I interview another industry expert in a topic to help you succeed on and offline. I'll see you in the pixels. Aloha.